So this panel is about how climate change interacts with tenure insecurity, and we hope to learn about the strategies and solutions that can help protect community land rights, potentially while also advancing all of the different climate solutions that are needed that Mike just mentioned. Tenure insecurity occurs where a land user, which for our purposes could be an individual or a community, faces challenges or threats to land access, use, ownership, decision-making or transfer. Protecting the land rights of communities is a crucial consideration when determining strategies for combating climate change, given evidence, including the recent IPCC report that Professor Gerard referred to, that the world's land use must urgently change in order to reduce emissions. Thankfully, I have a different paragraph from that report that I wanted to quote. This is from section 7.6 for anybody reading it closely. The report says that as demands on land are increasing, building governance capacity and securing land tenure becomes essential to attain sustainable land use, which has the potential to mitigate climate change, promote food security, and potentially reduce risks of climate-induced migration and associated risks of conflicts. As Professor Gerard mentioned, many strategies to mitigate the impacts of climate change require land, yet seeking to alter and improve the world's land use without considering the tenure and human rights of community landholders around the world risks exacerbating climate-related injustices and creating additional pressures on land. Communities' experience of the land pressures of climate change so far are already extremely complex and interwoven. On the one hand, the communities who customarily own the lands, whose biomass and soil hold much of the world's carbon, are one of our best sources of protecting against land-related climate change CO2 emissions. Indigenous and tribal communities have long-standing customs that advance a holistic view of community and environment that contrasts starkly with extractive economic models focusing on growth and profits that tend to disproportionately contribute to climate change. Such communities are also often the first to sound the alarm. This may mean fighting illegal logging by alerting authorities of illegal clearing or forest fires, or, as noted in the IPCC report, Indigenous and local knowledge may offer vital insights into how climate change is affecting the environment and food security in drylands and mountain regions. In a cruel irony, the communities at the front lines of protecting our Earth experience tenure insecurity the most and are forced to adapt to the harsh impacts of global heating and more generally are especially vulnerable to the effects of the climate crisis. Communities that rely on and protect forests and other carbon sinks suffer the consequences of land conversion and deforestation, often driven by agribusiness and extractive industries. They can also suffer the negative impacts of climate solutions such as conservation, zero deforestation, renewable energy, and more that seek to reduce the world's reliance on harmful fossil fuels. Tenure security, then, is one of the tools we have to help battle climate change while also avoiding contributing to climate injustices. Let us now turn to our panelists to learn more. Today, I'm extremely happy to be joined by Jane Meriwas, founder of the Samburu Women's Trust and a UN Fellow, Rukka Sombolinggi, the Secretary General of the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago, Aman. Remotely, we have Taiko Lemayian, who is the Executive Director of the Kenya Community-Based Tourism Network and who will be able to speak as a community member who has been approached by a renewable energy company to use their land. And finally, we have Karol Boudreaux, Chief Program Officer at Landesa. I have several questions for our panelists, after which we'll open up the conversation to the audience. So, Meriwas, if we start with you, you're the founder of Samburu Women Trust, an Indigenous women-driven organisation in Kenya whose mandate is to raise the voice and status of local Samburu women. And you work with many communities in seeking to protect and register their communal land rights. Why is this such a crucial strategy for Indigenous peoples, and especially Indigenous women, as they continue to experience the effects of climate change? And what challenges do they face in doing so?
Thank you so much, Sam, first of all, for having me here, and also for the participants coming in big numbers to listen this crucial topic, because when you talk around issues on land, we Indigenous people, we cannot exist without land, and that thing has to be taken keenly that land and us cannot be separated. Because if there's no land, it means we cannot exist. Our livelihood, which we depend on, mostly where I come from in Kenya, the northern part of Kenya, are animals like cows, camels, goats, sheep. They depend on land. And those are our livelihood. So if we don't have land, what we are discussing, before even going to climate change, then it means we cannot exist. So land is key to us as indigenous people. Secondly, as a woman, when you discuss around issues on land, women are the center. And mostly around the world, indigenous people, women are not involved. As much as half of the work, or even 95% of the work, is done by women, mostly around issues on agriculture, tilling of land. Where I come from, where we live, we are a pastoralist community, where women, they are the managers of those livestock. They manage everybody at home. But at the end of the day, they don't own it. The whole decision is based by men. When you look now at the national platform around issues on Land Protection Act, in Kenya, we have 3 sets of land. One is communal land, which currently where we live, it's called a trust land. So it means trust land is that it's just a land that the community live, but you don't have a legal document, like I started did to live in. The other form of land registration is private, where somebody can get land and register in their name. And the other one, and the last one, which also I think, apart from the private land, is the other one, which the government give it legally, either to put it for schools or even for conservation. But the sad part of it is that when you look in Kenya, 60% of the land, which is, they call it undeveloped land, those are the land lived by the pastoralist community in northern Kenya, and they normally call those are the land which are not developed. They are idle land because they're just vast land, and most of those areas, they're underdeveloped. So what the government does, because if it is trust land, and trust land is hosted by the central government, is that when the investor approach them, the government make a decision without consultation or participation or involvement of the local community. Currently, we have a huge mega project called LAPSET, Lamu Authority, Southern Sudan, Ethiopia Corridor, which is starting from Lamu going to Ethiopia and then Southern Sudan. This huge project is passing in indigenous people territories, and I will talk 10 years down the line, before even the Kenyan government evolved into counties, they had already allocated this land to Resort City. We just hear Resort City, it will be somewhere like Las Vegas. But nobody was involved. This land was given and it's degazetted. And as we talk, there's a lot of conversation, and the Kenyan government is engagement how to make sure that in Vision 2030, that this infrastructure is taking place. Without even having into account the people who are living there, what will happen to them? Our own identity, our lifestyle, what will happen to them? So as much as they get money, they don't care. So in terms of displacement, in terms of losing of our culture, our identity, or even where we live, they don't care. And currently, even Kenya is very technical. Not just Kenya, I think generally around issues on Africa. When you talk around issues on land, it's very emotive. With huge investment with the conservation, which is now is another way of displacing the local community in their own land. The government just decided that they want to give this area as a protected areas because there are animals like rhino and elephant to make it as a conservancy. But what they are going to do is that they are going to get our elders who cannot read and write and coerce them and tell them, you register as a conservancy. But once it is registered, it means when it is very dry, you cannot even go in to look for water or even pastures for animals. Then conflicts trigger. you become your own enemy in your own land. The other thing, the same land that they say it's idle, they also give it for national park. And as long as you have money, they can always give you that land. So in terms of around issues on land, is key to us, and it has developed like key ill motive. It is something very sensitive. Most of the government do not want to discuss. It's something that a lot of people are losing life, because when you discuss, a lot of people are generating interest and they don't want to discuss. Back to climate change. Of course, climate change, I call it a Western name. Because before climate change, we indigenous people, we've been struggling with the drought. Drought has been there, not today. And we, pastoralist community, have been having, a lot of mechanism and adaptation on how to cope with this drought. When it is very dry, most of our animals are wiped away. There's no water. And we've never migrated for that land. Why? Because we have our own mechanism, coping mechanism system. Unfortunately, most of this traditional way of coping mechanism is not yet documented. But our way of life, we know how to navigate. But because it's not yet documented, then it says, because we have many number of livestock, we are the people who are causing climate change. When we move from, because our migratory is that we move from one area to another, by the time you come back like 1 year to where I'd already left, that is already a mitigation system, because it means when you're moving around, when it rains, it's going to get, but unfortunately, people don't see that. They just see that we are just people moving aimlessly, bothering everybody, wandering, but we don't do that. And I wish even the researchers who are here can take keenly and document these things. I think when we talk about climate change solution and crisis, I think indigenous people, they have solution. It's only that the scientists don't want to tap it. They just come with this huge name, crisis of climate change, but where is it? I'm just asking everybody, it's curious. Anyway, so most of these solution, my time is over? Most of these solution, indigenous people have solution. And I think it is time for us to go back to those roots and interrogate further. How do we tap for those mitigation that our our fathers used to explore before even the modernity? Before even we are taken to school, before we understand to write and put it in the social media. Because indigenous people are the people who have solution to the climate change. It's not scientists, and it's not people with money. Despite the fact that we don't have money, despite the fact that we live in remote areas, we still have solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meriwas. Moving on to Rukka. You're the Secretary General of the Indigenous Peoples Alliance of the Archipelago, an Indigenous organisation with over 2,000 community members based in Indonesia, which is the world's largest producer of crude palm oil. What has the prevalence and power of the oil palm industry meant for Indigenous communities' land rights in Indonesia? And what strategies have they employed to try and protect their rights? And then a second question, if I may, what are you calling on the government of Indonesia and other actors to do in order to address these challenges?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, a very good morning for everybody, and thank you very much for the Center, Columbia University, for bringing us here. This is such a privilege to inform this rich audience on what is going on in our homeland. So I'm Rukka Sombolinggi. I'm Indigenous, belong to the Toraja people. We are keeper of forests and mountains and rivers and rice fields. But what I'm going to talk here is, some of you might have heard the community that just won the Equator Prize this year, Sungai Uti. So I want to start from the Sungai Uti story. Last month, we brought indigenous youth from 14 different countries to this community. And we were there exchanging ideas and experience. And on the last night, we were having party, community gatherings, and everybody looked so happy. We were outside of the longhouse because they live in the longhouse. And with me, one of the participants from Papua New Guinea, one from Latin America, and 2 from Africa. And one of the participants, he said, this community is very happy. And I said, yeah, why? Because for nearly 3 decades, they managed to keep their territory away from oil palm companies. And he said, yeah, I know, companies and government only bring us headaches. So that's the reflections of these young people whom in their life they're only facing problems. So when they came into this kind of community, they realized this is how our life is supposed to be. We're supposed to be just having fun. We're supposed to be just not have to go out and fight for our rights. So from there, I'm going to bring you to the contrast. We just produced a report with Human Rights Watch. We just released 2 weeks back. These reports, actually, there's nothing new on these reports. This report just provide updates of what is going on in indigenous communities impacted by oil palm companies. We have made the report in 2007 to the United Nations, the same report, the same community to the UN Permanent Forum, that resulted that the UN Permanent Forum conduct a research on how are the plantations and big industries impacted indigenous peoples. Nothing has been done ever since. We have also filed complaint to the third mechanisms, and nothing has been done by the government so far. But what is going on? What is really happening? As we all now here talking about climate change, we are not just talking about climate change now. We are not just in the crisis. We are beyond that. This is emergency. We are running out of time. We need to do something. But what is going on? Fake solutions. I heard earlier about aviation that use a lot of biofuel. Oil palm companies, crude oil palm companies from Indonesia, I don't know where they go, but I'm sure they're also used by aviations. But what is really happening on the ground? This community, the Semunying, they started to suffer since 2004. The practice of the company, and still going on until now, is first, when they get the permit, they will pay the government. So it has something to do with corruption. Indigenous peoples, we were never informed by the government or anyone that we are going to give your land for company. And then, when they come to the community, only we realize that our land is now belong to somebody else, just because the company came, they say, we have the permit, you have to go out of this village. And because, of course, we need to defend our land, because that's everything, as Jane mentioned earlier. And that's where the company will continue to do like elite captures. They will identify the leaders. They will capture them. They will give them money, try to give them money. They will take them to the city, put them in the hotel, give them girls, make them drunk, and then they can sign the paper. And they say, we got your consent. So those are all broken consent, manufactured consent, manipulated consent. And then, when they didn't manage to do that, the next step they do, is they will divide the community. They will make sure, as other society, indigenous peoples, we have owned our internal politics. That is by nature happening everywhere. In the US, you have Democrats and Republicans. That's eternal competitors. The same thing happened in our indigenous communities because we are all human beings. What company will do is they will identify these groups and they will make them fight each other. And they will go out and they say, oh, we cannot talk with this community because they are divided. They are creating the divisions. They fuel our divisions and they call us, we cannot sit together and talk. But they will never also try to make sure or to facilitate that we sit together and talk. But they will continue to go outside and say, oh, the community are divided, they are so difficult to deal with. There is internal conflict. They will continue to harvest, to take benefit on the division that they make in our community. And if that doesn't work, the next step is intimidations. They will send in police officer, they will send in head of the village, even head of the districts, military officers. Their presence is very intimidating for indigenous communities because this is something alien to us. And if that doesn't work, they will start criminalizations. This community, two of their leaders were taken, were arrested and jailed in 2006. And when they went out, they continued to resist. But what is going on is the government simply don't do anything. The companies simply don't do anything. We've tried every single step that we can have. We tried the what's so-called roundtable on sustainable oil palm, didn't work. It failed us. It failed us. And what is going on? The community, they have to move out from their land. And because of the move of their land, they lost everything basically, not just forest. So these things are still going on. And then while we are talking about biofuel, because biofuel means actually our blood. So while you are driving, while you are flying, that's actually coming from our blood. The blood of indigenous and also the blood of our forests, the blood of our lands, the blood of our very existence as indigenous peoples. So you can download the full report later on the Human Rights Watch research page, but I think I will end with that. And what actually want to call for the government is we indigenous peoples, we are not against companies. We are not against development. We are not against fighting climate change. What we are against is injustice. What we are against is our land is taken away, even without knowing it. What we are against is we destroy the earth. This is the only planet that we have. In the end of the day, you and me, we have the same interest when it comes to the planet. So that's all what it matters for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rukka. Taiko, we will turn to you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you okay.
Great. So, Taiko, you're a member of a Maasai community that has been approached by multiple companies wanting to use your land for wind farm-produced electricity, a type of renewable energy. Can you tell us about the challenges that you and your community have faced in deciding what to do?
Thank you very much. As you've been told, my name is Taiko Lemayian from Kenya. About 2 years ago, we had a French company that approached us, and they wanted to put up about a 90 megawatt plant. Then, beginning of this year, an Australian company also came up and approached us for the same. And basically what they'll do, actually what is happening is that in Kenya, the government developed what is known as a FRT, feed-in tariff mechanism. And when they adopted, what is happening now is that there's a scramble by renewable energy companies to access lands that are suitable for wind farms. And most of these lands are in pastoral areas. And now, what has happened now is that we were now asked to sign against, the dotted line. But then what some of us were now asking is, how much is it that they just come and say they will give you so much money. And then the biggest challenge that we had was that we went back to government and asked them, really, are this offer competitive enough? And the other thing that we found that like in Kenya, we don't have any national best practice norms or legal principle around these wind farm agreements. And basically, so we had to really go around asking any other person to try to give us figures. And the other thing that we really found is that even though these companies are trying to get the social license, they don't really give us disclose. They don't really give any disclosure. And the other issues that we find is that we've been fighting to have this company resource us so that we get experts to assist us, secure expertise information from other consultants, from probably people who are experts in the renewable energy, but others, like especially the German company was adamant. And after I decided to insist, they created probably what you could just say a coup d'etat. They called for a meeting in my absence, influenced a few people in my community to say, oh, this guy is taking too long, he's not having your interest. And incidentally, one of my neighbors, my uncles and so forth, ended up signing for very little money. But now what I did is that my family land, I just told them, no, we are not ready to sign for that. And the Australian company came in, and now we are negotiating with them. Well, the only thing that I find is that some of these people are not ready to, they come up with figures, but let me just share a few. We are just told that for purposes of access, which is 5 years, you are paid $200, $2,000 per year for 3,000 acres of land. This translates to probably 6 cents, And then you're looking at a company that tries to produce 70 megawatts of powers and so forth. We look at issues of the next 5 years when they're constructing, it's only $1 per year for 3,000 acres. So basically it's like $1,001 per acre. And when we did some land valuation, we found that land because we are close to Nairobi, our land is worth $40,000 per acre. So you can really see the mismatch, Somebody giving you $1 for a land that is worth 40,000 and so forth. Then you look at when you come in and really say that what we need is for us to share the output of power, then we just say, no, we will just give you a certain flat rate of probably, 200,000 Kenya shillings per year, which translates to 20,000. 2,000, 40,000 at 200 shillings is, okay. So basically that is the issue that is there. We don't have any legal instruments to support pastoral communities to engage with these multinationals. And I'll just share with you a situation that, because I came to South Africa a week ago for some training, and there's the Australian company that has an educator here in South Africa told me that it would be important to visit one of their wind farms. But as of yesterday, I'm told, okay, we will not be able to access the community there. We will not be able to access the fields. But we can always drive and around. I told them, well, I'm taking my flight back to home, because why should I just come and see a wind farm, from a distance, yet I can see some in Nairobi? Basically, what we wanted to was really to talk to the people and see that even all the rates that are proffered here in South Africa are competitive, are similar to what is offered for our lands. So really, without proper mechanisms to assist these communities with best practices, with comparatively figures of what is provided for per megawatt in a different country, and so forth, it now becomes very difficult for communities to do. And the worst thing about these contracts is that you have to sign for a contract that goes for 50 years. This is a multi-generational impact, which have really a lot of multi-generational impacts and opportunities. And so another thing that I observed in a number of contracts that I looked at, there are no mechanism for renegotiation. So basically it makes it difficult. I mean, if you just sign off 50 years of your land, then it becomes challenging. Then the other thing that I wanted to say is that because now of the fact that the few wind farms that have been licensed by government, the government is finding that because they produce intermittent energy, they're now saying that they will not license any more wind farm that produces intermittent energy using wind alone. And so what now we're finding is that we now have a challenge that we have to have a hybrid of wind, solar, and battery. And that now makes the fact that we could access most of this land for pasture for our land animals. But when we combine the three, then the solars will take so much land and make it impossible for us to access the pastures. And really, at those rates of close to $1 to $2 per acre, yet most of the PPPA power purchasing agreements that the government has done with others is like 90 cents. And 90 cents is what really is a global average for most of them. So we really find that there is need for more information to be given to most of the indigenous communities, because with now the opening up of the Southern African power pool, it will be that countries, especially the East Africa, will be able to access, to sell their power to other countries, energy deficient countries in Southern African countries. And so the scramble will continue. People will continue selling land because most of the people in the city who have information of how lucrative this business is are now coming to buy off pastoral lands and so forth. So those are the critical challenges that we are facing as a community, and especially now when you have the issues of the climate change. Some of these ramifications are so much because now we need more land per livestock unit than we were having before, and so really some of these renewable energy are not really becoming, positive, negative mechanism, but mechanism that might even make us lose more of our land.
Thank you, Taiko.
So, yeah.
I'm just wary of the time. So do you want to just offer any final?
No problem.
Okay.
Yes, I wait for any questions or anything.
Okay, thank you so much. Great. So we'll turn to Karol now. Karol, you're the Chief Program Officer at Landesa, a non-profit that partners with governments and local organizations to secure legal land rights for the world's poorest families. How do you see securing tenure rights as helping to mitigate the effects of climate change? And what do solutions that secure and respect tenure rights while also helping to advance climate solutions actually look like in practice?
Thank you, Sam, very much. I also express my thanks to the co-sponsors today, our colleagues at the Ford Foundation, our colleagues at CCSI, and also colleagues at Wake Forest who helped support the event today. So great to be with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the how of tenure rights, and I am not a climate scientist. I'm a lawyer. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the legal foundation for why it is that secure rights over land, which we talked about in the keynote, and my colleagues on the panel have been talking about why those matter so much. So those of you who are lawyers, this will be very familiar. Why do secure land rights matter? I'm going to focus on 3 issues. Number 1, secure land rights matter because they provide us with incentives to be forward-looking. When your rights are secure, by which I mean they're fairly clearly defined, they are defensible, you can implement and exercise your rights when those conditions exist. You can make plans about the future, plans that are useful for you, plans that are useful for your community. And that's a really important thing, right? In a way, these secure rights provide a kind of guide rail or post rail or signs, whatever analogy makes the most sense, to point us in a direction to encourage us to be future thinking. And we really need to be future thinking to address some climate solutions. But it's also important that when people have property rights or secure tenure rights, that these rights be of the appropriate duration to achieve the goal or the end that you're interested in. So if what you're interested in is afforestation or reforestation, you need to have a time scale that's going to allow you to protect trees for 20 years, 30 years, sometimes longer. So it's not only important to have secure rights, it's important to have secure rights for the appropriate length of time. And speaking about trees, it's important to have the right sticks in your bundle of property rights. So let me tell just really quickly a quick story. Some of you may be familiar with the example of farmer-managed natural regeneration in the Sahel region. It's a really interesting real-world example of how providing people with a bundle of interventions, one of which might include securing property rights, others of which might include access to information and knowledge like agricultural extension services, how bundling together knowledge and rights can lead to some really dramatic outcomes at scale. So farmers in the Sahel region, in Niger, and in Burkina Faso, in the 70s and 80s were facing significant problems associated with desertification. The desert was expanding. They were having real trouble producing for their families. They were facing consistent problems of drought. What happened in that region? So a very interesting story that I really can't explain in the short time we have here, but an important piece of the story of what happened in the Sahel region to regreen a region is that farmers reclaimed rights over trees. Trees in Francophone Africa had not been the property of farmers on whose lands they were growing. They had been the property of the government. In fact, if you look at Africa today, something like 95 to 98% of all forests in Africa are technically owned by the state, as, by the way, is much of the land in Africa. It is technically vested in either the president's hands or in the hands of the government, not vested in the hands of people who live on the land. So forests are a particularly bad example. In Africa, the government owns virtually all of the forests. The French government owned the forests in Niger and did not technically allow farmers to productively use trees on their lands. Farmers couldn't use leaves to feed their livestock. They couldn't collect branches technically for firewood. They couldn't collect seeds that were falling from trees. And so instead, farmers oftentimes saw trees as a kind of a burden, something to be gotten rid of so that the forestry department wouldn't come on their property and take trees away from them. So there were no clear incentives to conserve managed trees in the Sahel region. In the late 70s, early 80s, a program with a CSO started to help farmers not only do soil conservation, but to allow the trees that they had been cutting down to naturally regenerate in their fields. So this is an amazing story. It's a story I first encountered a number of years ago when Gray Tapan, a person who works at the U.S. Geological Services, was presenting sort of just mind-blowing satellite imagery from the Sahel region. If you looked at time-lapse satellite imagery, you could see maybe in the 1960s into the early 1970s, the region was tan. If you look at the satellite imagery in the 1980s, 1990s today, regions that might have expected to be tan, they're now green. Well, the entire story is not all about providing rights, but the story involves rights because farmers took back from the government de facto, they took back the right to keep trees in their fields. They would respect each other's rights to have trees on their fields. And so whereas a tree in the past might have been seen as kind of an open access resource or a resource the government managed alone, farmers amongst themselves decided each farmer could grow and maintain their own tree stock. So a kind of bottom-up solution to the problem of government not really being able to manage trees. And farmers themselves began to protect their own trees. They began to respect the rights of other farmers to have trees on their lands. Trees began to grow. And eventually the government ex post recognized the legal right of farmers to maintain, benefit from, and use the trees on their field. Thank you, Sam. So I think that's a really interesting, and the impact has been at massive scale in this area. So a really interesting example of, first, communities understanding, as my colleagues were saying, communities understanding what to do with the resources on their land, them exercising a de facto, or maybe we'd call it an informal right, over the property, over the trees, and then government coming along and recognizing these rights. So when I look around the world at what needs to happen from a legal perspective to turn the lever of land tenure in order to promote good climate outcomes, I see three main areas that need attention. And so let me just say these very quickly, because Sam's given me my time signal. First, absolutely, the top priority is recognizing and respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples and community members to the lands that they manage and have traditionally controlled. That includes things like improving legal structures and frameworks for demarcating land and for recognizing land. Many countries have some of these processes, but they tend to be overly complex, too cumbersome, and create real barriers for peoples to actually move through the process. Number two, I actually think the most important thing we can be doing, if those of you in the room are lawyers, is looking long and hard at leasehold frameworks to allow women to lease land, to allow youth to lease land in productive ways, to allow people, as our keynote speaker said, who are absolutely going to need to move, to integrate into host communities. Right now, leasehold frameworks are not something that a lot of folks have looked at for questions of equitability, or even for questions of supporting the kind of beneficial trades we were just talking about with Kenya. There is a strong need also then thirdly to look at how it is that we can support equitable contracting between community groups on the ground who are managers, very effective managers of resources, and other entities, institutions who would like to work with them to have access to some of those resources. So in 3 different ways, lawyers and the legal framework, I do believe, Sam, can be really helpful in getting us to climate-smart solutions, again, through recognition of rights, through improved leaseholding, and then finally through beneficial contracting mechanisms. We've certainly seen that at Landesa, and a lot of the work that we do focuses on each of those areas, and I'd be happy to speak to specific examples in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So before we open it up to Q&A, I saw a lot of the panelists kind of writing furiously while other people were speaking. I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you had any reactions to what any of your co-panelists said, if you wanted to kind of share additional thoughts or examples that you think are relevant to what other panelists have been speaking about.
So I'd be really happy. I'd be very happy to speak to one of the issues that Meriwas was mentioning, which is the incredible need under the law also to recognize pastoralist rights. Pastoralists have been marginalized for decades by governments, particularly in East Africa. Their pasture lands have been claimed by governments or converted into public lands. Their migratory routes are not legally recognized. Their emergency pastures are gone. And so the sort of traditional resilience strategies that pastoralists developed over the course of centuries can't actually be exercised legally anymore because their rights over these resources just can't be claimed. So I think thinking about pastoralist codes and thinking about creatively ways to demarcate and recognize migratory routes as well as set aside emergency pastures, and importantly, right, allow cross-border movement of pastoralists, which is a really tricky issue in East Africa because there's a lot of security components involved in that. But finding ways to facilitate cross-border movements is also another really important legal issue. So thank you for raising that, Meriwas.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted actually to point the land evaluation that they made in Africa in the previous presentations, because we also have conducted the same studies as well in 6 of our indigenous communities, and it shows that actually it seems that this global economic setup has nothing to do with us, doesn't impact us directly. So why during the time, at least in last 20 years, Indonesia have been hit by many financial crises. But only people in the city suffers. Us, in the community, we didn't suffer. We actually, and I remember in the financial crisis that hit Indonesia in 1995, actually, even we have indigenous community members who suffer from heart attack because it was the very first time in the history they saw a bunch of money. Because our produce, vanilla, coffee, cacao, and all these spices, the price gone so high, so we actually had no idea what we have to do with this money. People suffering because so much money we got, while people in the city crying, fighting just to get a bowl of rice. And at the same time, I'm talking about the research that we conducted. It actually shows that the real economy is our local economy. The real economy is the one that survives us. One of our indigenous community, just the direct access from the forest, from the land, from the territory, it's actually 10 times higher than the average standard by the government. And it shows that we contribute more to development, district development, rather than from the oil palm companies that is there in the district. One of our community, just one community, can actually pay the salary for the whole civil servant in that district. So that's actually how much the value of our territories. But those territories are not protected. Anytime still can be given up to the oil palm plantations. So these are the situations, and there are also, I think in terms of, and this is what I've raised also to some of the academic institutions. How can you make sure that our economy system is also counted as economy system? Because the big companies are owned by only few owners, the shareholders, but the one that we have is shared by all of us. And while doing that, we are actually saving your life. If our forest intact, we are saving people in the America. We are saving the European citizens. So that's how important it is, because we've been all telling all this beautiful economic development, very macro, based on investment and everything. The real investors are indigenous communities. And that will save us. So that's I think, very important also to discuss.
Thank you, Rukka. Jane, any comments?
Yes, I want to add something. And this just to add what my sister said around issues on indigenous people, really investor. Currently in Kenya, the Kenyan government had given 3 months that there is an old currency and the new currency that Kenyans are supposed to return, and the deadline, I think, in October. End of October, I think so. Now, where I come from, where a majority of them are pastoralist community, and majority of them even to have, access to radios, mobiles, newspaper, those are luxuries. So unless you'll get information, if it's news today, you get like a week. So, and when the government says something, the problem is they don't do civic education. Just like they keep on saying, pastoralist community, they're against development, but yet nobody gave us the information. So recently, one of my uncle, when I was going around, I asked them, are you aware that we're supposed to return the new currency? And then they asked me, is the government changing? We have a new president. Then I told them, no, they're just changing the currency. And then he said, then what will happen? I told him, if we have money, we need to go and take to the bank so that you're given the new currency. And then they were asking me, but you see those banks, they steal the money. Why should I take to them? And normally we just keep it in the house. So I told him, I'll accompany you to the city so that we go. And I didn't know that the money were many, because they were 1 million, that's $10,000. And he was carrying in a plastic bag. So I didn't know. He just said that I had money. So no, when we went, we were interrogated like a whole day. And yes, first of all, this old man didn't have an account, so they were interrogating me. Are you sure this money is yours? And then the man was keep on telling them, in fact, I don't want to open an account. I just want you to give me the new currency. I go back with the money. And then they were asking to where? And then they said, then I'm going to buy for more livestock. So in terms of indigenous people, mostly they are rich. And I think in terms of money, they value more even livestock than even the paper. They normally say money is paper. So they don't really value it. Because when you was told, this is 1 million, then he was saying, what is 1 million? How many cows or how many camel when you translate to that? So basically, when you talk around issues on investment, I think there is need to continue doing a lot of capacity building to the indigenous people so that they really understand what is happening, what is not happening. And when it comes to around issues on negotiation, if people want to, to invest in their land, they'll be able to say, this is not right, this is what they want. Actually, they know. It's not that they don't know. It's only that the people who come, they manipulate and use divide and rule. And they say, these people, your work is just to fight. You don't want to listen. And they take advantage, of that ignorance. But there is the need to continue this conversation and also to continue making sure that those structures that Indigenous people have, there is also need to tap in them and to enrich them, strengthen them, so that some with the solution, those are the ones that we can work with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are running out of time, and I do want to open it up to the audience. So initially we were going to have you break into groups per table and kind of peer review your questions. I think we'll skip that just because we are running low on time, but I'd be greatly appreciative if, for those of you who have questions, if you can make sure that A, it's really a question, B, it needs to be posed and answered in front of everyone, and C, it's appropriate to pose the question to these 4 panelists in particular. I'm kind of waiting for a woman to put their hand up, basically, at this point. Start with you, ma'am. And we'll take a few questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. NGO, Young Global Leadership Foundation. I'm also with the working group on mining. I want to address this about the health issue. When you have mining and you have the forest being burnt down, their lungs are being poisoned. What are you doing, or what do you recommend others to do in order to prevent this from happening? Because the Indigenous community does have to move on in order to prevent themselves from dying. And what are you doing within your own Indigenous communities to overcome this? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping it short. Okay, so we have one back here, and then we'll take one here.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to say that I believe that the predicament we're in now is a function of our history, and it seems that there's an inappropriate imposition of a Western model of governance in many countries of the world, and that is actually incompatible with sustainable lifestyles. So it seems that constitutions and executives are forcing decisions on people that are not really sustainable. Yeah? So my question is, do you think from an Indigenous perspective whether we need to get back to some kind of internal self-governance?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for all your comments today, really important. I hear throughout this a common theme, and the theme is the solutions that are being offered are not the right scale to enable local people to actually implement them and benefit them for their livelihoods. And I think we really need to look at this in terms of the technologies we're proposing to address climate change and all the other things. If the scale is driven to the lowest unit cost, you're going to have large industrial scale solutions. If you're looking for something that's more community scale technologies, and these can be very advanced technologies or very simple ones, I think you have a much greater opportunity to leverage development and retain the rights and livelihoods of those people. So I think it would be worth hearing about scale issues. A long time ago, E.F. Schumacher had a book, Small is Beautiful, and I think we need to really consider that in the context of social justice.
Okay, thank you. We'll take one more. Yes, up the back.
Hello, thank you. I have a question for Rukka. So Indonesia was a very centralized country with almost all power centralized in Jakarta. So decentralization has been going on for many years, but in terms of land use issues, it does not get any better. The district governments have more power now to decide what to do with the land. Do you think further decentralization is the right way to go forward in terms of, empowering the local communities to rule over their own land and etc.? Is a solution for solving the land use rights.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure that other panelists might also like to talk about that topic of decentralization. Okay, so to recap, we have a question about decentralization, a question about scale and locality of projects, and also a statement that we can turn into a question about Western economic models and how we should respond to those. Does anybody want to start the conversation?
Yeah, okay. I think I want to respond first for the indigenous health system. We do have indigenous health system, but the challenges that we are facing now from these all poisons is just beyond the capacity of indigenous health system. So that's why there's actually cases 3 years back when one of the indigenous peoples who live in the forest and have been poisoned by all these chemicals from the oil palm company, they died. More than 10 of them died in just in 2 weeks. But it didn't get into the media because it was owned by the police chief, Indonesian police chief. Internal self-governance, I think this is also one of the things that we discuss also in Indonesia, because internal means how can we make our own decisions? How can we have this free, prior, informed consent without being intervened by others? How do we do free without intimidation? And how do we make collective decisions that by being informed of what is going on, what is the consequences of our decisions, and how we are going to carry on after taking that decisions. And I think that's a very, 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 very crucial and a very fundamental rights to start when it comes to interaction with others, especially with government and companies. So that is very fundamental. The rights to self-determination, actually. How our life is our decisions. That is very important. I think technology, small is beautiful. I also believe on that. I'm a very great fan of Schumacher, and but I think in the current world that we are having now, we cannot deny that we are all connected already. Yeah. So what in my imagination, what is the future is how do we still connect? How do we still can share our wealth, our privilege in the terms of reciprocity, but how we spread the thing equally. So it is not just in the hand of the very few people. So indigenous people, reciprocity is one of the very highest value. We share with you, and that's what we want to share with you. We want to share our wealth with everybody, yeah, not just us, but with everybody. And that's also why we keep the forest, because we want to make sure everybody will have good life. But by doing that, by sharing, we have to make sure that you need to protect us first, so we can share with you. We can continue to share. I think that's the thing. And small technology, for example, electricity. How electricity is very cheap if we have it at the very local level. In one of our indigenous community, because they are off grid and we generate our own electricity, we actually share it into government grid, and we didn't ask for payment for that. Or maybe probably next year I'll go and tell you need to pay. Yeah, and our water, clean air. That's kind of things that it is very easy, yeah, to generate. And I think in terms of food production, we need to find the answer. I think people in the developed country, you just need to plan your own food lah. I mean you need to know. You have to know what you eat. You have to know what we eat. Like in my community, if I eat a piece of buffalo meat, I know the name of that buffalo that meat comes from. We grow up with our food. We love our buffalo. Our food, we produce our food with love. We know exactly the name of the buffalo we eat. And everybody of us, we have to be like that. If you want to eat, if you don't want to be vegan, you want to eat your meat, you grow your food. So I think that's the things, and that should be at the very local level. Centralized government and decentralizations, it's been a very bumpy journey in Indonesia. Decentralization started in 2001, and because of the suddenly you kind of like open the huge door for everything, so indigenous territories then suffer even more because now first in the hand of the very few people in the central in Jakarta suddenly become like in the hands of thousands head of districts, and they put it into pieces. So we suffer even more, and now they bring it back to the province level, which even we suffer also even more. So as long as our rights is not recognized, it doesn't matter where the decisions are made, we still suffer. So I think that's actually what is needed to do. Like, and I thank you very much. You pointed out is like recognition of rights, protection of rights is very, very fundamental. Thank you.
I think, yeah, but Lucas actually summarized almost everything. Something was raised around issues on health issue. Despite the fact that we indigenous people, traditionally we have the remedy around issues on herbal medicine, but it's also difficult to say sometimes it fails when those chemicals are there poured. It's difficult even for indigenous people, especially if they are, poured around rivers where it's mostly animals and human being takes. And it's difficult even to know what chemical it is. So sometimes to get a remedy is difficult. But we must also say traditional remedy and herbal medicine has worked in most of the situation when indigenous people identify the cause of the issue. And around issues on solution to technology, when you look most of our land, which mostly, I'll keep on referring this word, idle lands, because that's what the government say. Most of these solutions are found there, like the wind, the huge wind power. When you come to Kenya, that huge, I don't know it's called what, the wind power in Lake Turkana. Actually, it passes inside our land, it goes to the central Kenya, and we don't have electricity there. And actually, it is tapped within us. The same thing with wind power. When you go to northern Kenya, there is no electricity, there is no road, but they are tapping from us. And they are saying we don't want development, but how? When you are tapping from our land, because they say idle land, they are not human beings. These people, where we live, we have those small huts, but we are very proud. Those are our home. We don't live in big homes like this one with electricity, but that small hut where, my mother can migrate like 5 years when, just made it from a small brush of a tree, because that's where we manage a lot of, forest and tree. When you cut, you don't cut the tree because we protect it. So you cut the branches, and when you cut it, the small one you throw away, the animals are going to feed on. So that home, when you move, you migrate with it, so you don't leave it. So at the end of the day, we don't destroy. That's why when we move, when you come found where there is a pasture they've lead, there is nothing, because they've moved with literally everything. That's also part of us, solution and how also to cope around issues on climate change. But when you look critically, most of the government in Africa, they underlook upon the pastoralist community. They just say that you guys, you are ignorant. Even the benefit they get from, they don't even put schools so that our kid can, get those schools, or even healthy facility, so that when people are sick, you can access. You go hundreds of kilometers without seeing a healthy facility, not even a school. But beside all that, we've been coping with them. So there is a need to continue to have this conversation, because this is not the end of the world. We indigenous people are continue to live here, but there is a need to have that conversation, so that when we say, with the spirit of let leave no one behind, make sure even you people who are in a faster world, when you are moving so fast with the technology, make sure you don't also leave us behind. And you keep on shouting, let's leave no one behind. Make sure also you work with us indigenous people so that we can also try to help you and tell you these are the solutions that we also been having for centuries when we didn't have electricity, when we didn't have water, or even when we didn't have, anything that, because most of these things here are luxuries. Where I come from, they are not even basic needs. Like road, there are no road. So those are not even schools. So basically, let's move with everybody so that all of us are in the same page. Thank you.
Thank you. Taiko, if we can turn to you for some very quick last thoughts before we finish the panel, and then I'll turn to Karol as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. What I just wish to say is that it's quite a healthy discussion. And there was a question that was asked, and especially doing with, do we revert to the old systems of governance or leadership? And I'll say, if at all we adapt we leave the modern leadership structures and we revert back to the communal land, then I think we'll end up solving quite a lot of problems that we are facing now. Because issues, let's say, of land ownership, we have very good structured mechanisms that are very fair to everybody, that really dictate how we control and access resources, right from water, forest, and so forth. And you really see in any other area where you don't see government intruding, you really find very fair structures, because the biggest problem with governments is that you really find somebody living very far away and probably gets a privilege of having information, prior information, and then corruptly accessing your resources and using some laws that we do not know. And when I come back to issues of renewable resources, and especially when we talk of renewable energy matrices, what I'll just say is that this is a new frontier. And what is happening is that nearly everybody is rushing there. And without us having mechanisms to make sure that people are able to access the right information in the right time, then it becomes very difficult for people to make prudent decisions or for resources that are in their lands. And so without those resources, then we might end up having a situation where it now becomes an area where people will be deprived of their land. So elements of land grabs might come and take into consideration. And when you're really looking at interests that are multi-generational in nature, going for that are 50 years, 60 years in nature, and where you're told that there is no room for renegotiation, and so forth, then it becomes very difficult. I think the model that has been adopted by extractive industry can be tailor-made to kind of come up with the models that will advise both governments and communities for them to make prudent decisions that affects the life. The other issues that are there is that in all the contracts that I've seen, there are a lot of hidden benefits. some financial streams that is accrued from such models, renewable energy projects, like especially one of the carbon this carbon sinking, carbon cost question, is that you really find that all those money that is accrued from there will go straight to the multinationals and so forth. So those, somebody needs, I don't know, the World Bank or any other sector there, the developed actors, should really come up with very defined modalities and instruments to really first protect the interest of the community and also safeguard the ownership and control of these resources. Because the funny thing that we've tried to say, like what I've been trying to push, is the concept of shared resource. We sell them, okay, fine, rather than give us land. Why don't we offer our land? And you offer you the technology, then we share the resource. Because then it will be a win-win. But basically, you really find most of these investors just want to pay you for the money, but they don't want for you to share any ownership or benefits that's accrued from that. And then the other thing is, I'll just say that the most there's something that I really found that is that the people who are decision makers, that I end up really negotiating with this multinational at the national level for, and especially for when it comes to negotiating for power purchasing agreements and so forth, are equally ignorant. So you really find that this is a person who is entrusted by the whole country to come up with the best interest for the countries. But seriously, they are equally as ignorant as we are. And they're grappling out there in the dark. And basically, probably by them really getting some money, probably through corruption, they just offer these licenses out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taiko. And just on that point of kind of inclusive approaches to renewable energies, hopefully we'll be learning about the Right Energy Partnership later today, which is a Indigenous-driven model to renewable energy generation. Karol, you get the last word, and if you could keep it to 2 to 3 minutes.
I'll keep it very brief. Thank you, Sam. So for me, the takeaway from this panel, and actually the takeaway that I think is echoed in the IPCC report from August, is that sustainable climate solutions cannot be cannot be driven by only technocratic approaches or very complex modeling, right? They, at their heart, have to depend upon and be grounded in governance issues, particularly issues around land governance, and critically recognizing, securing, protecting the land rights of Indigenous peoples and communities who are managing much of the critical landscapes around the world. So there are solutions, like the good news, to end on a positive note, is there are solutions. Some of them are legal solutions, some of them are Indigenous solutions, and I feel confident that we have good examples now of those solutions, and we can work together to promote those solutions at local scale and at larger scale. Thank you, Sam.
Great. Thank you very much, Karol, and to everybody, to all my panelists. We will now take a 15-minute break and be back at about 11:35 or so.